Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everybody, I am so excited to introduce my guest today, Scott Perelstein. Scott is the Chief Operating Officer at Alchemy Academy. Scott is a change management specialist who closes the gap between strategy and implementation. His years of experience translating between planners and doers aids in shepherding teams in the same direction, especially in times of change. Scott draws on his business management degree from Cornell University, as well as a broad book of experiences to build success. From creating new and innovative businesses to shaping the culture within teams and organizations, his work is informed by his various roles as an entrepreneur, supervisor, and board member. As a facilities specialist for over 20 years, Scott has seen the facilities world through the lens of a contractor, an owner, and a director. He has managed hundreds of employees and cared for millions of square feet of higher education facilities. He specializes in bringing about change, focusing on inclusion from the highest level of administration to the frontline workers. Please join me in welcoming Scott Perelstein. Hey, Scott.
Hello. Good morning, Tammy.
It's good to have you here on Work from the Inside Out. So, as you know, we talk about all the different places people go in their careers, the twists, the turns, the ups, the downs. And so we just had a wonderful introduction to some of the things that you've done. Now we're going to get a chance to fill in some of the blanks. So tell us about some of the earlier years. What happened in some of your early years that informed where you are today?
Great. Well, thank you. Let's see. I started off with a series of family business established businesses that I was not in the family, but worked at, and certainly saw a lot of interesting politics, both business and familial.
Uh-huh.
I would say my first couple of examples were really reinforced what not to do.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And the feeling of really being an outsider in a company where you knew you were never going to be on the inside, you were treated like you were on the outside, and you never really engaged or felt that much commitment to it. And I think having truly felt that really informed a lot of the ways that I managed later as I had people who worked for me to really feel like they were part of something and we were doing something together.
Yeah.
And so I would have loved to have been in a program or in a industry where there were a lot of examples of the great ways to do things. And that just was not my experience.
Yeah.
I don't think I was particularly thoughtful in my first couple of years of what my career path might be or what to do. I just sort of bounced around a little bit. And in doing so, I think I got a lot of examples of the ways that things should not be done.
So tell us a little bit about some of those earlier opportunities or jobs. Are you referring to family businesses where you were hired into someone else's family business and you felt like you were the outsider because you weren't a member of the family? Is that what you're referring to?
That's correct. So family businesses that were big enough to have a set of employees, 50, 60 people working there, but still a really strong familial dynamic. And clearly you were on the inside or you were on the outside. And, it wasn't by choice. It was the opportunities I had at the time and they showed up. And sometimes I knew somebody who knew somebody, and I was looking for that type of work, which seemed like a good idea. And then
Yeah.
got in there and felt the culture of that really being that you are either, you're really working for the family, not for the business.
Got it.
And they really, I think, culturally just did a poor job of sort of getting people aligned with any kind of higher mission, any kind of reason that was beyond serving the family, which you were not part of, and you never were going to be, and you never really wanted to be.
And so, Scott, I'm curious, at the time, did you realize, I mean, I'm sure you knew how it felt to feel like an outsider, but were you taking mental notes at the time thinking, wow, this is how not to do things? Or were you, I don't know if you were on the younger side at that time, if this was, were these jobs you had, as a younger person, or was this after college? Not that you would still be a younger person then, but I'm just curious, at what stage of your life were you at, and what kinds of mental notes might you have been taking? Because, now we're talking about, of course, all of this, reflectively. So I'm curious, what kinds of mental notes might you have been taking at the time, and how did those perhaps impact the kinds of decisions you made going forward, either in terms of making choices about the kinds of organizations you'd go to work for subsequently, or maybe even the kinds of work you did? Were you able to discern at that point between choosing the kinds of work versus the kinds of organizations? Were you able to say, I don't know if I want to do that kind of work again because I didn't like how that felt, maybe not even distinguishing between the dynamic of the family versus the kind of work it was itself?
Yeah. Well, I think the translation for me was, so to answer the first question, I did definitely took some mental notes. Started off right after college was the first one. The next one was a couple of years after that, kind of rolling into almost my 30s. And at that point, I really was starting to feel like I had a path, and that that I was going at some point to be in a leadership position. And so I absolutely paid attention to not just the feelings, but what were the infrastructures that created that feeling, that separation. And when I went to work I worked in higher ed at a university, and the silos of a state university are very similar. And I was able to translate the sort of us versus them mentality that a lot of people possess in those types of worlds into, well, I know how that feels to be a them instead of an us.
Yeah.
So I remember how to navigate this differently. So I think I was pretty conscious about it there. At the same time, I spent a few years working with construction contractor businesses, which also was that balance between sort of the administration or the executive level and the doers, the workers. And when I worked at the university, that was my role to translate those. And so I think that helped there as well, to have worked side by side with the doers in my youth and know what that feels like when somebody's giving orders that don't make sense, or things that you want have a contribution to make and they're not listening, and they've got it figured out, but don't listen to the guy in the field, and be able to translate that to when I was a director in facilities, where most of the people who worked for me, the couple hundred people that worked for me, were all the daily doers of maintaining the facilities there. So I think that I was able to translate and take the experiences that I had and utilize them later on in my supervisory capacity. And I think those experiences were applicable. It really helped.
So it sounds like you took the lemons and made some lemonade out of them.
Yeah, it was. There was an incubation period in between, unfortunately. There were years of lemons, and then there were years of lemonade, and they were not. They were not at the same time.
I think many of us have gone through that, and that, we maybe it's lemonade made in a slow cooker, but
Yeah. Sequential lemonade.
Exactly. I'm curious what you studied undergrad, and how that what did that lead you directly into some of those earlier jobs, or what you studied was there a direct link professionally, or
not really? I mean,
no?
So I have a business degree at Cornell. It was in the agriculture college, so it was called agricultural economics.
Mm-hmm.
Fairly broad, some marketing, some advertising, some accounting. I did have a focus on entrepreneurship, and maybe that's what led me more to the smaller contractor family business as opposed to the giant corporation type of thing. But I didn't know what I wanted to do or how I wanted to do it or where I wanted to do it. And I think I stumbled into jobs based on contacts and where I was at the time more than this is what I studied and I really want to do that. I certainly felt in the back of my head like entrepreneurship was a good fit for me. And even though I was a salaried employee, my wife and I always had sort of a side gig. We had done a couple of business type things on the side, and sometimes that became permanent and sometimes that was a side gig. So that aspect of it, but the other part I wouldn't say is a direct reflection on the education.
Yeah. But it sounds like it's a direct reflection on just who you are, that was a part of who you are. And that while it might not have the direct link to the academic piece, and I think a lot of us ended up, studying something and then moving in a different direction. And as you put it, stumbled into certain places and certain roles. I think most people stumble into jobs through what we call networking, right? Through those personal connections. So, so those earlier years you worked for, some family-owned businesses, some smaller businesses. You learned what it felt like to be an outsider, but clearly you also gained some skills and was able to build yourself up to more of a leadership role.
Yeah. Yep. And I'll tell you, I did have one is an interesting story for me because so I have two sort of grown kids, 20 and 17, and I'm always thinking about trying to impart my knowledge and my experience, and you have no idea which things sink in and which ones don't.
Yeah.
You bring something up from a few years ago and they have no idea it even happened, and it was still the most, impactful thing in your mind, and other things that they grabbed onto and kept that you don't even remember happening. But when I was in high school, my dad changed jobs, and he was super forthright about discussion. Like I'm the last child, so I was home alone. He and my mom and I had a bunch of discussions. He had choices of what job to take. And I remember very vividly us having discussions about how he was an electrical engineer, and he had risen high enough as an engineer that they were making him a project manager. And he said, in most industries, you get to a place where you did such a good job at what you know how to do that they don't ask you to do that anymore. They ask you to manage people who do that. And so I'll no longer do any engineering, which I love, but somebody needs to step up and be the manager of that. And that transition sort of was one of those conversations that stayed with me. And years later, I think that was a theme I used a lot in the facilities world, because the best carpenter was our carpentry supervisor and the best custodian was our custodial supervisor. And that transition can really be difficult.
Yes.
And having talked about it as a youngster, 18-year-old, 17-year-old, gave me a framework where I think over the years I was adding data to that and really thinking about that concept, because I had sort of lived through it vicariously in my family. And so that was a place I really spent a lot of time and attention, and I think had a good impact of helping people make that transition. And since then, of course, I realized that, oftentimes the best physician becomes an administrator and the best teacher becomes a principal. And, it happens across all industries, that concept. But it really is a transition of changing who you are, how you look at yourself, what success looks like, what your goals for the day are. I mean, at the end of the day, did you build a fantastic cabinet that somebody's going to put books on and utilize, or did you schedule well? And sometimes that's a hard transition to say, boy, I did a great job of scheduling today. Good job. Pat myself on the back. That's a difficult transition when you used to do something, you used to build something, you used to impact people. And so I think from a life standpoint, that one experience is something that I think has shaped me for a long time. And it's fun that I can think back to those origins and really kind of connect those dots of how that evolution happened for me.
I love that you brought that up, because I think that many of us don't always realize the impact that our careers or our work lives have on our children, and that we really are role models for them. So I love the fact that you remember that conversation with your dad, and that your dad had the conversation with you. And it's such a great example of how many people in roles that have some technical expertise or hands-on kinds of tasks, and they get promoted into jobs like exactly how you describe what your father discussed with you, where you get promoted into a job where you're now managing people rather than managing things, so to speak. And it really is a whole different skill set. And some people get that promotion, and it's a reward, and yet for some people it ends up being a really negative experience, because nobody prepared them to take on all this basically human resources work, or prepared them to have the skills, the emotional intelligence, or the soft skills as they're called, to do all of that. Now, some people have those skills very naturally, but there are lots of people out there with amazing technical skills, engineers, carpenters, as you mentioned, who those skills don't come naturally to them, and it can actually be the downfall of their career. I know that because some of them have ended up sitting across from me in a coaching session. And my heart breaks for them, because they've really, reached a pinnacle in their career, and then they get rewarded with a job that doesn't suit them. But I think what you're speaking to here is, it's sort of a double-edged sword. For some people, it's a great place to look and a great place to grow. And for other people, it really, they need to find another way to grow and develop as well. I'm sure you've seen both. But back to the point also about just, I think, learning from other people's pathways. That's the whole point of this podcast, really, is to show, how other people's pathways and different ways that they've navigated their careers can, maybe spark an idea for somebody else. So thank you for sharing that story. I think it's an important one. And it sounds like you yourself have had a number of different roles where you've either been more hands-on or more in the managerial role yourself. And I know you've worked both on the side of working for a company or for an institution, and for yourself, and that you've, using your own words that you shared with me, you've kind of boomeranged back and forth. Tell us a little bit about that, and how that has formed or shaped the path of your career, and what, how that's led you to what you're doing now.
Okay. I think the crux of those kinds of transitions are truly the expectations game. You can really mess yourself up going either direction with holding on to the expectations of one world and moving into a new world, and it just doesn't work there. And so, your own preparation, your own self-talk, your own story of what you're about to do or what you've done in the past, the expectations are so different that you really have to hold on to that. You have to think that through. You have to be deliberate about recognizing that and codifying that for yourself so that you really are getting into what you expect to get into. I had worked for myself and loved the flexibility of it for my home life, for my lifestyle. I knew that going to work for the state was the opposite. They're counting hours and days, and the time your butt is literally in the seat is more important to them than what you're accomplishing, which I had been in, the opposite. I had control over that. If I did a 4-hour day, but got 6 hours worth of work done, that was great. And I moved on to do something else. And so those transitions, you really had to be eyes wide open to make that work. My entrepreneurship experiences have been fairly solopreneur-y, very smaller businesses, and oftentimes alone or just you and customers, where the culture and the social world of the university at 5,000 employees, that's a whole different planet. And so those transitions were, parts of it fed me and parts of it I resisted. So knowing what you're getting into and what you can create and establish in your own influence is important. I think that I approached the state employment as an entrepreneur. I was building my own entrepreneurial area that I was taking responsibility for and making decisions about and representing. And so similarly to having my own business, I knew I was in charge of my own marketing. I was in charge of my own PR. I was in charge of my own budget. I was in charge of how people felt working in my group, and the efficacy of my leadership was going to be a result of the people that worked there and worked for me. And so I think that attitude was one of the things that really helped me in that environment.
Can you say a little more about how that helped you?
Sure. I think that the obstacles and the struggles that you imagine in a siloed state organization or even any large organization, a lot of the frustrations come from people who have built walls around themselves and they see their work in isolation. And certainly the frustration from the customers, it comes from that isolation. When you get sent, I can't help you with that. Here's another phone number to call. I don't do that. That's not my responsibility. I don't understand it. I don't really care. I think really affects the whole organization. And so I think my ability to come in with a little bit more of an entrepreneurial background, I wanted to participate in the larger picture. I wanted to understand why we do the things we do. How does what I do affect other people, and how can I do what I do in a way that improves the overall experience or the overall outcome? And as a solopreneur, you do that with every contact you make. You're really just putting together the spider web of people and who can help and how can we do this together. And, oh yeah, Joe, you should talk to Tom because you guys are doing that together. And someday that may come back and help me, but I don't know, but we're going to do it anyway. And I think I approached the state work in that same way of saying, I'm here to contribute and my group can contribute. And the more we contribute, the easier it's going to be for my people if we're popular, if we're adding to the overall improvement of the product or improvement of the mission or improvement of the customer experience. And so I think having that entrepreneurial approach kept me from building walls and being siloed. And I think in the end, me and the people who worked for me benefited from that.
So, I love the sound of that, and knowing people who work inside. I'm assuming that you're referring to working inside a university. Knowing people who work in universities, and I know, for example, someone I know who was trying to set up a new office in a university and just trying to even get a chair from the equipment room, getting even used furniture. Well, the equipment room wasn't even open most of the time, especially during COVID, right? Yeah. So, and it's like, oh, well, we're not open. So you can't even find somebody to talk to even find out when you can get a chair so you can sit at your desk,
Right. Yeah.
And I can imagine how you might have set things up differently and created a way for people to at least get the information they needed. It sounds like you were a great, and probably teach people this or coach people to do this, to be a great connector, to really develop those relationships and collaborations so that you're really breaking through all those walls. It's not, I mean, I've worked in a university myself, not in a state university, a private one, but still, I remember how siloed everything felt. And if it wasn't in your area, you didn't have to concern yourself with it. And yet it sounds like what you did was you broke through those walls and created more interdependencies and relationships so that people could, not feel like they're being left in the dust, so to speak, and could feel like, oh, they're going to get at least an answer. They may not even always like the answer they get, but at least they get an answer.
Right.
I love the sound of that. And I love what you were, how you described that as an entrepreneurial approach. It also sounds like what I've called kind of internal customer service. You treat everybody you work with, whether they're, that if you treat everyone you work with as if they're your customer, how can you imagine how organizations would work so much better if everybody is your customer, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so thinking about the people who worked, who reported to you and adopting that kind of a mindset, I can imagine the sense of belonging, the sense of team that people would have. What an antithesis to your earlier professional experiences working in companies where you didn't feel that sense of belonging.
Yeah, that was huge. I think to really focus on why we're there, that you are, who are you serving and why are you there?
Yeah.
Versus what's your benefits working for the state and how long do you have to stay until you can retire?
Right.
Changes everybody's every day.
Yeah, it really it makes you feel purposeful and that there's meaning in being there. And so we haven't even talked about what your job was. All we've talked about here is how you conducted, and almost in a way, I mean, I'm curious to know, I know you were working in facilities, but in a way, we don't even need to know what you were doing because how you were doing it was so vitally important, what you were creating. But you can tell us what you were doing.
Yeah, so I was the director of operations for facilities, so taking care of the buildings.
Yeah.
All across campus, all the buildings, and then the people who took care of them.
Yeah. Buildings. So was that a big campus that you were on?
Yeah, there's 20,000 students, so there were about 350 people in my organization.
Oh yeah, that's a big place.
Yeah, out here in the West, the state schools are big.
Yeah, and I don't think we mentioned this that you're out in Arizona, so so it's things get pretty spread out there. So so we also touched on the whole notion of kind of boomeranging. I know that you have gone back and forth, and now you are gainfully self-employed. You are an entrepreneur. Tell us about how, or tell us what you're doing today.
Yeah. So my wife is a cultural anthropologist, and I have the experience in the trades. And together we are working with clients who are developing leadership programs to grow their own employees, or are going through these same transitions, developing executives or family members who they want to become executives, and helping them learn those soft skills of leadership, of how to manage, of why the culture is important, why employee happiness is important for your success. We do workplace culture work. We do leadership training. We do one-on-one coaching. And a huge component of our work. So going back to the example of the best carpenter in the shop ends up being the carpentry supervisor. We spend a lot of time on the soft skills and the personal growth aspect of seeing yourself as a leader, of stepping into your confidence as a leader, and how that not only leads to your success, but your team's success and your employees' success, or the people you are leading, in knowing that that really how you see yourself and how you step into that transition makes a huge difference in the outcome. And some of it is skills. Some of it is that you've never had to do spreadsheets before, or you've never had to schedule, or you didn't care what it costs, and now you're the one being responsible for what it costs. But also, the turning it off at night, the how you're in charge 24/7, and you have people crews working 2 shifts. How do you not sit there by the phone making sure they're okay, or are they doing their job? Or so working with the skills of balance and focus and communication. You maybe for years worked on a small team of 3 people, and that was all you cared about, and you didn't have to look at the big picture. And I was thinking about the very ubiquitous interview question that comes out. Tell us about a time when you disagreed with your supervisor, but it was your job to sell their idea. As a regular carpenter, you never did that. You got to speak up and complain and bitch about it, but you didn't have to sell it to anybody. But all of a sudden, when you're in the middle management position, that's challenging, because there's people above you trying to move the whole aircraft carrier, turning it to the right. And the people below you they're just worried about what time is lunch, and are we safe? And I really want my supplies when I need them. And it'd be great if we could get a cooler tool that made this easier and faster. And so you really are that person that's it. You're in the middle, you're in the nutcracker. And so all of a sudden you may not have those skills. You may never have done that before. You may not be a middle child, So, teaching people that kind of thing is really where we end up spending a lot of our time and energy.
Wow, it sounds so important. A couple things that just really popped as you were talking about that is, growing into your leadership, growing into identifying yourself that way, really getting comfortable in your own skin as a leader, and then also trying to bring your team along, especially if many of them have kind of lived in the world of, I punch a card, I take my lunch hour, I'm done at the end of the day, I leave it behind, what's in it for me, as opposed to what's in it for we, and really building more of a culture, a team culture, and greater buy-in across the workforce. How rewarding that must be for you and your wife to do that together. And it sounds like you have a number of different ways that you work with people to really help them learn and grow into operating that way. But between the coaching and the training and other, sounds like other kinds of activities.
Sure. And the translation is, if you work in an organization, or you're rising as a leader or a manager or a superintendent or whatever that is, you're stepping up into your leadership position for people. If you're an entrepreneur, particularly a solo entrepreneur, oftentimes that confidence and that stepping into your leadership role is changing what you're willing to charge. It's changing what you allow yourself to earn. And so those same ideals, those same feeling of sort of stepping into your strength and standing in a leadership role can truly affect your livelihood as an entrepreneur. Here's what I do, but this is what I I'm really great at this. This is what I do, but this is what I charge because this is really all I'm comfortable saying out loud.
Right.
Versus this is what I do. These are the transformations I make, and this is what it's going to cost you to have that.
Yeah.
And that changes my life considerably.
Wow.
And so those same characteristics can be used in an organization or a bureaucracy, and they can in a solopreneur situation.
So you also work with solopreneurs?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, kind of across the board. Yeah, we have a pretty good range. We've done a lot of work with artists, local artists in the community. And what do you charge for your paintings and why? And how do you change what that looks like? Local small insurance company, 5 employees, and people have a tendency to sell very similar to what their own self-worth is.
Yeah.
That data has been proven for years and years. We worked with, large corporations and parts of family businesses, having that experience of knowing what that's like. And, we're doing executive coaching for a family now that's looking for what is their, when we retire, which of our kids is going to take over and will they be ready? And so we're working hand in hand with one of them to help them kind of move up into that leadership vision of themselves.
Wow.
They've got fine skills. They just didn't really see themselves in that role. And that's tricky. The soft side of that is tricky. So there are definitely specific skills of reading and reading the people, reading the situations, communicating, when to stand up and be the leader and when to sit back and ask the people who work for you to come up with solutions and give them a chance to contribute. But a big part of it is also, who are you that shows up every day?
Right.
And do you believe yourself?
I love it. I love the way you bring together kind of the helping people to not just identify with their skills, but who they want to be, who they want to become, and really help them get more comfortable in that place. Sounds like you're offering a lot of value, and a lot of value across a number of different industries or areas that people work in. It's very fascinating. Is there anything else that we haven't touched on in this conversation that you want to make sure that we explore here?
Interesting. I think the one other thing that I really feel strongly about, and it comes up often on both sides of the equation with these same themes of who are you versus what do you do, is the whole world of interviewing and hiring. And in an organization with 350 people, you're always hiring. Both people are moving around and moving up, and you have vacancies that need to be filled, and trying to teach those same, the best carpenter how to hire a carpenter. And so I like to spend a lot of time on those two sides of that, working with people who are making a transition, who particularly from entrepreneurship to the working world, who don't necessarily see how to translate the skills they used as an entrepreneur into what business might want, what an HR executive is looking for, or what they're asking for in a job description. So I enjoy working with people who are on that transition and trying to help them see, you go into the step-by-step functions of what they did as an entrepreneur, and then translate those into how that fulfills a job description requirement in a posting. And sometimes for entrepreneurs, that's difficult. They wore all the hats because you had to, and you never really thought about it, and you never really broke it down. You just worked from instinct. And to be able to communicate that for a role is important. And on the flip side, I spent a lot of time as working with supervisors and managers to learn how to hire for fit, to think about the team you have and what you're looking for. What are those skills that you can really teach? You could show somebody how to do that thing better if they don't have that skill, but you have a functioning team of people who are working well together. And if you hire the wrong personality, you're going to blow up what you've already accomplished. Yeah. And so, particularly craftspeople, tradespeople who a lot of their self-worth is hinged on their skills.
Yeah.
When they hire, they're very focused on the skills. Can they do the job well? Are they skilled at, can they handle high voltage power versus low voltage power? And some of that stuff you say, over the next year, could we teach somebody to do that? Let's get the right person to fit in. Who's got the right attitude? One of the things I talked about often is that doers are often short-term thinkers. They're like firefighters. Where's the fire? Point me at it. I'll fix it. But they're not real strategic. And so I spent a lot of time saying, wouldn't it be great to have somebody in your organization that's thinking about next year and the year after that? Mm-hmm. Not just how we did it yesterday, but how could we do it tomorrow and what that path looks like. So trying to create some balance in a team of how the people on the team think, and they don't all have to be the same.
Right.
And sometimes having a pool of variety gives you good debate and good ideas. And we take sometimes we do the short-term solution, and sometimes we're looking for the long-term strategy. And in the end, we all benefit from those different perspectives. And so I think those same characteristics that we talk about in leadership are crucial in the hiring process, in hiring for fit, and in being able to translate your own experiences as you shift back and forth between entrepreneurship and employeeship.
Wow. I love that you brought that all up, because from where I sit in a lot of the career coaching I see candidates on a regular basis being on the receiving end of either a very poorly written job description or on the receiving end of a very poorly executed interview process. And they come away from that interview or interview process not feeling seen, not feeling like either they start to turn on themselves and think they didn't do well. Mm-hmm. And I often will say to them, you did an amazing job preparing for this process, but not all people who interview are great interviewers. Don't make the assumption that just because they're hiring you, that they know what they're doing in terms of hiring. They may know what they're doing in terms of the work they do, but hiring is a whole different function. So hearing you talk about this is music to my ears. I love the way you express that, Scott. It just,
thank you.
So important. I hope there's some employers listening to this right now, because and I don't say it to be disparaging, but mm-hmm. I do think that sometimes employers think they know what they need and they start interviewing. And then as they meet candidates, then they start to reshape or form what they really need. And I think that's a natural process, but I don't know that they always know what they need right away, or they think they need a pile or a bucket of skills, when in mm-hmm. fact, you're right. They need the fit. They need the right person. Mm-hmm. And that person could potentially learn some of the skills they need.
Yeah. And I think taking that one step farther out, if you are a supervisor, manager, director, or whatever that's trying to implement any kind of transition or change, the greatest lever you have is your next new hire. And so if you are not hiring for the change you want to see made, you are putting shackles around your own feet. And so that whole hiring process should be marketing towards the new reality that you're trying to create, and bringing in somebody fresh is the supercharger. I mean, to bring in somebody who's already on board with the new concept that you're trying to get people who've worked there for 20 years to embrace is magical. And you've got to take advantage of those opportunities and think that through of how am I marketing to possible employees so that they choose me as much as I choose them based on where we're headed. And I think that's crucial. And I think I agree with you. I think there are a lot of sort of automated mechanical hiring processes. It's a hassle. It's time consuming. I've got my real job that I have to get done. I don't have time for that. And you're missing out on one of the most powerful levers of change, which is a new human being, a new person who's already on board, who doesn't have to be sold. to bring in an ally if you are looking to create any kind of change management within your organization.
Right. And sometimes that new ally you bring in could even be somebody who's very seasoned, very experienced. I see a lot of people in their 40s, 50s, even early 60s who are looking for their next gig. And they're not necessarily somebody who needs to be the rainmaker or needs to be the next supervisor. Some of them may have already been in that role, but they just want to bring value. And they go in with their eyes wide open. They bring a lot of experience, but they're also open and curious. And I think some employers just, will dismiss people who appear to be older with the assumption that they're going to cost too much. They're not, they're going to only want to do things the way they've always done them. And so that's an area that I think I would like to think more employers would be more open to. I know that they are careful about that because of, discrimination, but there's a whole amazing pool of potential employees out there who would be more than happy to work for a reasonable salary, who bring tremendous maturity and skill to the workforce. Not to dismiss our younger employees, but
right.
It's just something I needed to say because there's a lot of great people out there who really want to roll up their sleeves and bring value to an organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think also it's difficult for us. We know that data has changed significantly from the one career, one company to, here's my 5 skill sets and I'm going to be in 20 jobs in 5 different industries. And it's very easy to point the finger at the youth and say, they don't have staying power, they don't have commitment, they don't, all that stuff. And yet we don't apply that to older employees who would probably give us twice the duration that the youngers will, but our expectations are different. We don't want to hire them because they may not be here for 20 years. Well, the 20-year-old's not going to be here for 20 years either. There's no way, not anymore. It's never going to happen. Right. And so it's funny how we assign different expectations to different age groups based on sort of, you and I are similar age, having grown up through that huge transition from the Gen X's, from the great generation to what we have now. Yeah. And, I don't think we apply it evenly. And I think that's to our detriment. I agree with you. I think
totally agree with that. I'd love to think that there's a whole bunch of employers out there listening to this conversation when it comes out. Well, Scott, this has been really interesting. And it's clear that you've taken every lesson learned out of your own experience and really translated it into a big vat of lemonade. And everybody you work with is getting a big glass of lemonade now and benefiting from your experience, your wisdom, and your wife's wisdom as well. And I want to thank you for being here today. What's the best way for people to learn more about your work and find you and connect with you?
Thank you for your kind words, first of all. And I would love to say that my distribution of lemonade is unbelievably fulfilling, and we love to do it. We really love to see people grow and help them, and that's been fantastic. The easiest way is probably just to straight out email, and it's Scott at alchemyacademy.com, and it's ALCHEMIE academy.com. Or you can look at alchemyacademy.com website and see information about both of us, mostly some of Janine's work and Stand in Your Strength, but you can certainly access us through that. And we are open to conversations that don't really have an aim or a purpose. We find often that having a conversation and sort of letting it organically end up where it ends up can be beneficial for everybody. And so if there's information that you heard that you want to hear more about, or situations that you have personally that you just love to discuss with somebody who's not in your organization and get an outside opinion about it, both of us truly enjoy that problem-solving discussion of human people. And so please don't hesitate to reach out to us if there's anything that you think we could do to help.
Well, that's a very generous offer. Thank you. And all of that information will be in the show notes, so people will be able to find you. So again, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And I'm going to be the first in line for that glass of lemonade.
Thank you. It's been very fun.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Scott Perelstein. It was so interesting to speak with him about his professional journey. What is your key takeaway from our interview? If you are interested in any of the resources or links mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them on the blog page of my website at www.tammygoulerloeb.com. Just look for episode 116. Are you thinking about what your next professional move is going to be? Perhaps you're feeling a little stuck. Get specialized group and individualized support, insights, and accountability from a brilliant mix of professional women in a safe, non-judgmental creative space. Join one of my small, hybrid mastermind coaching groups. They're starting on a rolling basis. You can learn more at https://bit.ly/navigating career change. If you were inspired by this episode with Scott, please share it with your friends and colleagues, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. Remember, subscribing is always free. Are you enjoying the podcast? I'd appreciate your review on Apple Podcasts. It's really easy to find through my website at www.tammygoulerloeb.com/podcast. Just click on the Apple Podcast button and follow the instructions provided there. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. I'd love to hear how it's going for you. Feel free to drop me a line. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.